Oh my God.
Today, go ahead.
Today I made actual coffee. Like I was driving back home from my mom's place in Buffalo and it was the afternoon. It's my nap time. I know that you're a young man, but you'll get to a point in your life where like naps are, if not essential, very desirable. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't know what age that happens, but it's real.
I had to do that this past weekend just with the way that like all the stuff that we had to do at the end of the semester. I think
Yes.
both Saturday and Sunday, I did close my eyes on the couch for a while.
Oh, this has been, I'm not totally done yet. I probably have like one more week of like, we have presentations that we're doing on Friday, and I haven't like figured it out yet, but it's fine. It'll all be figured out. I have ideas. Um,
I took your approach of just less words, more pictures. I wanted to do that anyways, but like the fact that I was feeling like I was throwing this together at the last minute, like really solved it. So,
right? It feels freeing.
hmm
Um, so speaking of presentations, I haven't sent you these, but I have scanned them in. Um, I have all of the evaluations except for one from our from our institute last week.
Great.
And they are overwhelmingly positive, and that is fun. So, are you still sending your email? I can.
I mean, I'm just putting the BCCs in, but
Oh, okay.
it's to a class, so that's why there's BCCs like FERPA. Um,
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's smart. But what did you think? How do you think it went? What was
I
your
enjoyed it a lot. I feel like it was a good, start to what we want to do. I I I don't know if we want to spoil the fun part of it, or
or
if we want to save that for part two, if we're gonna keep doing this conversation next week. But
yeah. What well, we can keep it high level. So we did a 2-day institute with about 10 faculty at our school on equitable grading practices. And I thought it went so well. Like I was
yeah,
super, like not super nervous. I had concerns that that you never know what people are going to say, right? When you put them in a
right.
group, and faculty are the best and worst because they have in some cases so much job security, and like answering tough questions is super important too.
But I also think like too, you don't know how people are going to react to things because when you start approaching stuff like grading practices, that's something that is so ingrained in your identity as an instructor, like the stuff
Yes.
that you do in the classroom. So to get sort of an inkling that or any sort of feeling that what you're doing might be harming people is like stressful. And like I deal with that sometimes too, just being like, is this the right way to do things?
Yeah, it totally, yes. And I think so I teach this class called Great Mysteries of the Earth, which is basically a class for people who don't love science, and it is how you can use the scientific method to sort of logically evaluate any mystery or really question that you have. Um, and so, one of the first things we talk about is how, like, in your brain, beliefs are in a separate location from like knowledge. So you can see things, right? But if something that you see butts up against your beliefs, your brain has this like sort of survival instinct that kicks in, where like if like your brain feels threatened, because your beliefs are like a network. They're not just like isolated points. And so if one of those beliefs is wrong, it's connected to a whole bunch of things that could be wrong, and then that is threatening to people. Um, but we had good questions for sure,
Yeah.
but I think they were good in all the right ways. Like it didn't feel like anything but awesome. Welcome to Coffee Break Classroom, brewed for higher ed, where teaching meets good vibes. We're just two friends chopping it up. Here you can expect a blend of ridiculous classroom stories, a little educational research, and some practical teaching techniques. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's talk teaching without the grading.
Yeah, so today we're going to be unpacking grading practices,
Yeah.
right? A lot of the traditional ones that you have probably seen in the classroom, the things that have been around since the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. So thanks for joining us today on Coffee Break Classroom. And do you want to do the? That's all.
Yeah, we're brewed for higher ed.
We're
So
totally brewed for higher ed today. I'm definitely brewed for higher ed. Um,
I don't
s
know what that means.
you don't want to know, Ben. So, I think one of the things that came up at our institute, which I think is important to talk about today, is that like. So, can you tell everyone about how you were first hired to teach at our institution? And
Oh,
yeah,
sure,
it was a great
100%.
story.
So yeah, because I was on a 2-year postdoc that ended 4 months into lockdown,
My
right?
goodness. Yeah.
So I was in California at the time and didn't want to stay in California and pay California rent if everything was going to be done in person and I was just going to be doing a bunch of part-time odd jobs. I had
Mm-hmm.
2 research positions I was doing and one like adjuncting position I was doing in 2 different states and I was living in a third. And I was applying for jobs at the time and I applied for one that went up in like October
Okay.
and then had a bunch of interviews in January.
Mm-hmm.
And like mid-January, I get, can you start in 2 weeks? And I said, what?
Yeah, no big deal.
No big deal. So by the time that all of the hiring paperwork and stuff got settled, I it was 3 weeks before the semester started.
Perfect.
And I had to teach a bunch of classes that I'd never put together before, things that I was familiar with and could do or figure out, but some classes I've never even taken because I was teaching mechanical engineering. But I
Mm-mm-mm.
figured them out because it's just a sidestep away from physics. But like I was handed,
Oh my. I'm
please
sorry.
cut that. It's,
No. No.
I was handed it's been a long 2 weeks, like from
That is
finals and the
so
institute,
true.
and my brain is mush, so forgive all of us. But I was handed a set of course information sheets. That was all I was given for a set of courses and told to do something like this. And so I had to use that as a baseline in terms of what I was doing for exams, what I was doing in the classroom, where like I built everything off of that. I didn't even have a textbook for 3 weeks. I was using the sample chapter from the publisher's website for like
Perfect.
the first 3 weeks of class. It was wild.
So, I've talked about this before, but what I think is wild about higher ed, and this is a continuation of that theme, is how it's like a really important job, and then there is no training typically that goes into it. There is
No.
no, often like your story, no prep time that goes into it. It's just like go. So, it's wild that you are given this position of trust. Go ahead.
And I was gonna say, and thankfully, like I have an education and research background. Like I have so much training in terms of
Mm-hmm.
pedagogy that
Yes.
like you could really give me any class and I can put something together. Like even if I need to learn the content a week ahead of time.
That's fair. And there have been plenty of times that I've been putting together classes like a week ahead of time or like a few hours ahead of time. Like if sometimes, I mean, the easiest way to put together a class is to throw together a lecture, but that is not the most effective way to teach most things. So, but it's in terms of time efficiency, it's the content in written form, right?
Right, but thinking about things from a much larger perspective, like practices, like when you don't have time to put a class together,
Yep.
or even when you're not even sure what the other options are, you end up defaulting to the way that you were taught, like the way that you went through class and the practices that you experience is or what you're just even told to do by the department that you're in. Because I've been in when I was adjuncting at a different school, a I had a class and the department sent out a list of like grades for like the past 12 years, like averages for the
Really?
past 12 years for every single course and said,
Wow.
try and make sure you design your class so it ends up with an average like this.
Really? That's
Yes, they wanted
wild.
to like standardize it, which is wild because I was teaching an introductory physics class and it had an average of like 2.1. And I'm like, you want me to try and like fail half of my students? But also it
Good,
was
good.
all over the place because that was the average of the averages.
Yeah.
Like if you look at all of them, like there were some of them were up at like 3.7, which means that the other side must also be the case.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, this isn't helpful. None of this is helpful.
That's wild. So yeah, so you get this syllabus, and there's presumably language on how the course is divided up into terms of perhaps number of exams, number of labs, and percentages for that, percentages for homework, percentages for whatever else, participation. And you have like a very short amount of time to learn content, design activities, and go, right? So, how is an instructor expected to ask some of these questions in an intentional way where you can really design your class in a way where you're assessing what is meaningful, especially if you don't even know the content that you're going to be
Hmm.
teaching yet? It's a wild job.
And sometimes it's hard too because like once you do it on the fly like that, it's so much work to make any changes later. It's like
Yes.
the inertia of like this exists and to now change it and do something completely different. It's the same amount of work. Like you have
Yes.
to redo everything.
So I always think that it's like I don't ever feel like I have a course ready to go really until it's the third time I've taught it. Because the first
Hmm.
time I'm like putting it together, but I don't really know what I don't know yet. And then the
Hmm.
second time I'm like revamping the hell out of it because I know what didn't work the first time. And then by the third time, I'm tweaking. I can
You're
tweak
working
then.
out the bugs.
Yes.
I think I mean I've been where we're at for the past 4 years and I feel like it was the fourth time that I had finished a class. So I think it's probably more like four for me.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because I had to learn the content the first time.
Well, that'll
But
do it.
yeah, that will do it. But I finally at a point where I'm just like, I'm good. Like it's done. I don't
Yep.
need to I don't need to add anything. I know what's going to take up a 15-minute time period. I know what I want to fit in. I like with space to be able to have questions. We'll talk about like teaching at human speed later because that's one of the presentations I'm doing at the end of this week. We're going to
Yeah.
reprise it. Um,
Perfect.
but yeah, I will say that I am at the point where I can just show up to class without looking at my notes beforehand and
Mm-hmm.
just go. but
It's
but
so freeing.
getting stuff settled in a place where you feel good about everything, it does take some time.
For sure.
So I think was the plan for our episode today to kind of I mean, I said unpacking practices at the top of this, right? But
Yep.
are we going to kind of go through the list that we put together for our institute? Is that the plan?
So
What would you like to do?
I thought that this week we would talk maybe about some of the problems of traditional grading practices this week, and then
That's what I
maybe
was thinking.
okay, perfect, same wavelength then. Um, yeah. So go ahead.
I meant the list we handed out to people is like the first thing that we did. Remember they paired up. We had people pair up and like look at a particular grading practice and
Yes.
think about who does it help, who does it
Yes.
harm. Like I
Yes.
think that would be a nice thing to unpack for this episode. And
I
then the
totally
next
agree.
one,
Mm-hmm.
right? The next one we can kind of get into what are some other alternatives that we can do.
Yes. Ooh, and I just wanted to give you a teaser to these evaluations. 100% of people who attended our institute talked about how freaking awesome our grading practices speed dating activity was. 100% of people were like, this was so much fun. So perhaps we can unpack that a little bit more next week. Or not. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
keep it as a teaser. But
Yeah, I think that's good.
so, for some context, I don't know when you first started thinking about grading practices in a deeper way, but for me, it was absolutely when we were reading as a school. We had our teaching and creativity center do several book groups on the book Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman. Is that
Yeah, it was a
true for
great
you?
book.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I was leading those book groups,
Right.
so
No, I know,
yeah,
but I didn't know if there were
yeah.
things you had thought about prior.
Well, most of the stuff that I have for my background as an education researcher is about pedagogy and
Mm-hmm.
interactive engagement and like those types of things. Nobody really ever did talk to me about grading practices
That's what I'm
at all.
saying. We
Yeah.
have redesigned the way we teach classes. We've redesigned like student onboarding. We've redesigned like how we communicate with students. But like it's like a huge thing that we've never talked about really up until not we, but I mean like there are folks, right, like Susan Blum for ungrading and obviously the Joe Feldman book. And then after that, we followed it up with David Clark and Robert Talbert's Grading for Growth, right? So there are folks who have been talking about it, but I feel like it's really just coming to the more of the forefront now in
Yeah.
higher ed conversations.
And I'll put all the books in the any of the ones we mentioned in the episode description for people
Yes,
who are like, wait, I need to rewind and get that.
absolutely. So, yeah, so we did this quick little think, pair, share activity last week where we had faculty or participants break into pairs and look at, I think, 4 or 5 different grading practices and think about, which I don't think we often give ourselves time to do, who does this practice help? Who does it harm? And one of the things that I like, oh, thank you for putting that in the chat. Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is, oh, but I'm recording this, is that we, I just lost my train of thought because anyway, it's fine.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. What? Okay, so I don't think we give ourselves time to think about that stuff. That's all.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Who does it help? Who does it harm?
Yes.
The activity we did. Yeah.
All right, where would you like to start?
That's what one is like if we want to get our feet wet a little bit, right? I think if we want to start getting into what grading practices do where they look at behavior and not actually like the content understanding students have, like why don't we start with the idea of participation and effort grades?
I love that. Yes. So I love that people like wrestle with this. And that's because, so, participation and effort is something that we like to see in students for a bunch of reasons because like we know that student engagement typically correlates to better success. Not always, right? We have all
Right.
had students who don't have to do the homework and show up to tests and can sit there with their heads down and still like rock an exam, right?
But there is still a correlation between like attendance and like
Yes.
success, right?
Absolutely. And engagement and success for sure, especially
Mm-hmm.
in online classes. And those are behaviors, but they don't necessarily tell us much about understanding, but they are behaviors that we want to encourage and nurture, but maybe not in a way that connects to grades. So, yeah, I think that this is something where we have to think about as instructors, like we want effort, we want participation, we want attendance, we want engagement, but then what
Mm-hmm.
are some ways that you can encourage it where you're not necessarily like putting a number to it?
Right. Because I mean, I was going to even think about what the issue is with it first, right? Before
Mm-hmm.
we start trying to like solve things.
Yeah.
It's just that like anything that we're doing that's evaluating student behavior, if we're looking at like, it's just, it invites bias because it forces students to fit within a set of behaviors that's anchored to like our personal idea as the instructor of what effort looks like.
Yeah. And participation, I think, as like white folks in our culture, participation and looks different than it does in other cultures. And I think in some cultures, like sitting and looking attentively, or like not making a ton of eye contact and like taking really good notes is what participation looks like. And so I think when we are, ooh, someone's at my door. Don't answer that, Chloe. It's a bug guy. Um, it is actually a bug guy. I'm not kidding. No, Chloe, don't answer it.
Why?
Because it's a guy selling bugs removal services.
Whoa.
We'll edit that out. So
It's good to know we'll edit your things and not my
no,
things.
we'll keep it in. I don't have bugs in my house.
Hence why you're sending him away.
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I think we have a very Western normative idea of what participation looks like. And so I think when we start interpreting behaviors, like we don't understand the mindset behind it.
Hmm.
Attendance isn't necessarily an indicator of a student's interest in your class either.
Right.
Hang on.
Right. Or like necessarily their like perseverance, right? Or tenacity.
Yes.
Like you're just kind of like looking at, hey, did their circumstances allow them to show up today?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And like rewarding attendance when like that just means showing up to class is not certainly effort or participation. I've seen students show up to class and immediately go to sleep. So I wouldn't consider that necessary. I mean, the effort was getting there. But
Hmm.
I think when you are grading for attendance, you set yourself up for situations like that. And that isn't great for the environment of the whole classroom.
Right. Because if you're thinking about effort too, it's like just because there is effort doesn't mean it's the right kind of effort. So,
Ooh, say more.
well, I mean, I'm just saying like you can have a student that's spending 10 hours studying for an exam, but if they're not going about looking at things the way that they need to, like it's not the right kind of effort, so it's not going to achieve the results. Like they can spend 10 hours just reading a textbook, but like if they never actually do a problem,
Yes.
again I'm thinking very heavy STEM
That's okay.
oriented, right? But if they
Hmm.
never actually put in the right kind of effort to do the practice that's needed for them specifically, we're giving points for that, right?
Yeah. So, what do you think are some good ways to get at understanding maybe? Oh, actually, I'm lying. We're going to keep that for next week. Just kidding. Um, I was going to
So,
ask how you can figure out that they are thinking without grading for participation and effort. But I guess
oh yeah, there are ways around that with some of the
sure,
formative assessment we talked about, I think
totally,
actually. So less
yes.
as a spoiler and more of a like remember that other episode.
Oh, that would be a great
Um,
thing for y'all to listen to if you forgot. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I can understand, right? Like in school in K-12, right, there are actual awards for perfect attendance, right? It doesn't matter if you're sick, it doesn't matter if you have life circumstances, you're rewarded just for showing up. And I think to go back to what you're saying about the Industrial Revolution, right, that is absolutely rewarding, like showing up for work. Um, and it's training students to be employees, which is important, but not what grades necessarily should be based upon.
right, because if it is important, then you just need to make sure that you're like being very transparent about why it's there, why it's important, and then what exactly effort is
Yeah.
and how it's going to be measured, right? The transparency part of that is super important. So if attendance is a thing, like make it clear what your attendance policy is. If the thing is asking questions, how many questions does the student need to ask in class to like get their participation credit? But then at that point, right, like you're making so much more work for yourself as the
Yes.
instructor.
Yes. And this is something we talked about last week about the idea of like, you're not a bookkeeper, right? You're an instructor. You're there to like change minds, to challenge beliefs, to make people, to inform people of discipline specific content, to guide thinking. You're not like, there, and I think that'll come through in a bunch of the things that we're going to talk about today of like stop making more work for yourself. We're all in 100 committees. We're like all being pulled in 100 different directions. Stop making bookkeeping work for yourself.
I will say I do want to think about the other side of this too in terms of like who does this help, right? Because like
Yeah.
that was something I think that came out of the people in our institute.
Yep.
There was a good bit of that, and I think participation and effort can be something that is there that's nice for students that do have a lot of anxiety about tests. And I mean,
Yes.
there's other ways to help and deal with test anxiety, but if you don't have another way of doing that, sometimes that can make students feel like there is a little bit of a buffer for them.
Yes. That is very true. That is very true. Um, and there are students, right, who will show up for the carrot, for sure.
Hmm.
Um, like,
Yeah, I think this is actually a great transition, right? Because one of the first things that I did was get rid of late penalties.
yep.
Because if you think about just from this book, and if you think about late penalties, right, that's another place where you're making more work for yourself
Hmm.
because you have to keep track of how many days that the student hasn't been there. You got to build in some sort of whole algorithm into your learning management software
Oh my God.
that calculates what the student's grade is supposed to be. And then at some point, like Well, actually, immediately it stops being about the student's content understanding and just being about their behavior again.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think who late work helps though is are those students who
You mean late penalties?
late penalties, yeah, for
Yeah.
oh sorry, not late work, but yeah, late penalties. It does help students who sometimes need deadlines to keep themselves on track, like they need the accountability. Um
And that's why I was going to say it was a good segue
yeah.
because when I did this, I had like less than 10% of the class was still like, can we have late penalties back? Like we like late penalties.
Yeah.
We like, and I had to really stop and have a conversation with them of why do you need the threat of punishment to be motivated to do your work? Like y'all have been traumatized so hard by the K through 12 system,
Mhm.
just that needing that threat of punishment. And so it's they need it for accountability, which I really want to put in quotes there because that's the only way that like they are managing their time is just
It
every all
is.
of the deadlines that everybody else is giving them.
That I think that's exactly what they're doing is that they're helping to manage their time. And I think deadlines are also kind of important so that as an instructor you have at least the understanding that most of your students are thinking about the same sort of stuff at the same
Hmm.
time. So for information that builds on each other, like presumably in a perfect world where everyone went right home from school and had nothing else to worry about but school and they could just kind of explore what they're intrinsically motivated by and they had nothing else complicating their lives, that it would keep everyone on the same page and everyone had the same opportunity to to get all their materials done, and that it does keep like the consciousness of the topic of thought like consistent, which is useful.
Yeah, I kept the deadlines. I
Yep.
just got rid of a late penalty. But like it was like a switch got flipped because I would have students be like, there's no like I'm not motivated to do homework when there's no deadlines. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I made the deadline. But like the fact that there was no penalty there, they just completely didn't even see the date associated with it anymore.
So I think that's interesting because, like, if you think about developmentally, our students are many of them, but not all of them by any stretch, are young adults, right? And so
So it's an object permanence thing. Is that what you're saying?
I did no, but I do think it's like being able to self-regulate your learning thing,
Yes.
and so being able to prioritize stuff. Not all
Which
students have those skills at the same time.
we're better suited putting time and effort into helping students develop that self-regulation and
Yep.
helping them develop time management than we are trying to police it and make more for ourselves.
Totally, totally. I do agree with that. Um, and so I think a natural follow up to late. Actually, can you tell your story about your what happened the first time you removed late penalties? This is such a great
Oh,
story.
sure. The rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so I had students asking that, but I also, in a class of, actually, do I have those slides somewhere? That would be
I
nice.
mean, you totally do. I just
I
remember the
know.
big number at the end.
I do want, and I want the big numbers. I want to know exactly what the big numbers are, right? So I was teaching, there were two classes that I was looking at, an introductory physics course and a introductory engineering course, which covered Excel and Python and a little bit of robotics type stuff. And I took off the late penalties on everything. We still had the assignments. I was still grading them at this point in time, but I just when they got turned in was not something I was concerned about and didn't. And so I ended up having um you can cut this like 20 seconds of dead space because
Look,
I've
if
got
we
the
got the
slides
dead
open.
bug guy, we're just kidding.
No.
What?
Uh
What?
I had 21 students in my physics
There
class,
we go.
59 students in my intro engineering class. The physics class had weekly assignments, so 15 assignments, 15 labs.
Mm-hmm.
The programming intro engineering class had 16 labs. We did 2 a week. And then it was robot time. So by week
Robot
8,
time.
it was robot time. By week 8,
Oh my God.
I had 139 assignments and labs that were past due.
That's a lot of labs. That's probably concerning.
Physics.
That was probably concerning.
I was concerned. Especially because I watched so many of those students finish the lab in class. Why did you not just turn it in when you left? Why has this not been turned in yet? I had you marked down as attending. I know you finished it because I saw you leave. Like, why did you not submit it?
So what did they say?
Um, they don't have any good excuses for me.
Okay.
There's nothing I can
Okay.
think of.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't even know. I
Okay.
don't even really know. They forgot. I don't know.
Perfect.
It's distressing. It's still distressing.
I
We're
can
3 years
see
out.
that. I
I'm
can see
distressed.
that. I can hear it in your voice.
In my intro engineering class, I had 397 lab reports that were past due
That seems
by week
fine.
8.
That seems
By week
fine.
8,
Oh my God.
halfway through the class. And it was at that point in that class where I was like, okay, we've had our fun. Like, I need 1, 2, and 3 by the end of like this week. I need 4, 5, and 6 by the end of next week. So I did structure it, and I was nice. I didn't say like get all your shit in, folks. I was like, get these in. Like, I need to have them graded because I can't do all of this by the end of the semester,
Yeah.
right? Like that's really what it is. It's like not only structuring them for students, it's structuring it for us too. So I started
Yes.
doing that. And I also was closing physics labs. I was like, you need all of these in by the end of Thanksgiving break. Anything before Thanksgiving break, it's you're done. I even by week 12, I had now 182 assignments and labs in my physics class that were past due,
Perfect.
and I had 492 missing labs for my intro engineering course.
So let's pause there. 492. What is going through Ben's head when you see this number?
I think I'm gonna have a really bad finals week.
Yeah.
But at this point, I'm also thinking that we're so far past where we covered the content in class that like I don't know if it's helpful for you to even still be looking at this or doing this if you haven't already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say like the nice thing of this is like that did end well. Like it did end.
Yes. Yes.
I still have a lot of stuff to grade and I did structure it so it wasn't as bad. But in terms of my physics class, there were 2 students on that list, I will say, that never turned anything in
Okay.
and like had stopped attending by Thanksgiving break, which is like not new
No.
like for physics courses. Like they'll some of them are just not feeling it. They're like, I'd rather be a business major. It happens, and it's usually not even me because we know that like we've had students not fail my class and then come back.
We've
But
all
there's a
had
lot
those
of other
things, yes.
yeah, that's true. There's a lot of other classes that students have to take as engineers, and if you're done with Calc 2, like then in fact our system makes them drop all the co-requisite classes if they're going to drop that class too. So
Okay.
it's the way that the computer works. But I had 7 to 8 students who rarely turned stuff in on time, but then did manage to turn it around and be fine. But still, it was just a lot of work
Yeah.
to do.
So not ideal for the instructor, and it sounds like not necessarily super ideal for the student either.
Not at all. Yeah.
So we'll talk more about how you remedied that next episode as a little teaser.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk about extra credit because everyone thinks that when they're doing extra credit, and we all know that like sometimes students won't turn in work that is for credit, but you'll have a small handful that will like move heaven and earth to get 10 points of extra credit. I don't understand that. Like, yeah.
And sometimes there's an overlap between the two of them.
Oh my God. Yes. Yes. And it's like if you turned in 10% of your assignments, it's like worth 7 times as much as this one extra credit thing that you're going to spend time on. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So who do you think extra credit helps?
I think it helps students who are in that position where they were maybe out for a couple weeks and they need to make up some assignments because there's some zeros in the grade book.
Mm-hmm. I think it helps students mentally more than it helps them mathematically. I think
That makes sense.
right. I think sometimes you need to like feel like you get like a little bit of a fresh start, and it's like a reset almost. Like, not only am I not gonna lose points on this, I'm actually gonna gain back some of the points that I, to your point, missed because I was something happened for a couple weeks or something.
Right. It's like an undo button.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And they think it's like a control alt delete, but really it just like undoes like one step. But yes. Um so what about who extra credit might harm then?
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. Is like I do think that a lot of the time that doesn't outweigh it because outweigh the harm because when we're making extra credit, we're always saying it's optional. Like you don't have to do it.
Hmm.
Is if like that makes it easier for the student that doesn't have the time because of all of the things that they have to do outside of class. Or I even know like faculty who give extra credit for students attending plays
Yep,
or things like that, which like costs money
true.
if they're going to somewhere outside of what happens on campus. I don't even know if it's free for them on campus, but
I think it
like
depends.
they're it when even if it's optional, if it's requiring students to spend more time working on doing stuff for the course on top of what they're already doing, like you're only advantaging, is that a word? Does that work in that context? You're only giving an advantage to students who already have the time and space available in their lives because they don't have a part-time job or a full-time job that they're working. They don't have kids that they have to take care of.
Yeah, I do want to. So, for the people who are like, but wait, when I give my students extra credit to go to like a speaker that we have on campus that I think is really going to enrich part of the curriculum. So, I don't want to discount those folks. So, what would you say to those folks?
Well, I would say that those are really good enriching opportunities that we should encourage our students to be involved at. But if like you're going to have that be an option, then I would say you need an alternative
Mm-hmm.
for like for students where they can do one of the options for like the extra credit. So that way like students would have an additional pathway to being able to achieve that extra credit. I know that I do on my final exam because there's not a retake for it and it's like the last thing. I have a couple bonus point stuff on there, not a lot, but
Yep.
like small bonus point things from activities that we did in lab and in class because that is going to kind of reinforce some of the conceptual stuff and some of the coming to class stuff. And I tell students, I'm like anytime we're doing these tutorial activities, like there's going to probably be a bonus point question about this on the final exam,
Mm-hmm.
just letting you know, like, so they all kind of know beforehand.
So,
And I do build that in, but like that, but my students have access to that
mm-hmm.
because they're expected to be free for class time. They
Yes.
can even make stuff up if they need to. So,
So I do similar things. And I like my whole actual presentation this week is about infusing joy and play into the classroom. So this kind of goes along with that. I will like video clips that I'll show that I think are hilarious. I will absolutely put extra credit questions about those on an exam. So a good example would be I show this video which was made by the National Film Board of Canada, definitely in the 1970s, and you can find it on YouTube. It's called Rise and Fall of the Great Lakes. It is 17 minutes long and it is perfection. So, my first semester teaching, I had like 20 minutes left in class before, like at the end of my glaciers class, I had some like a weird amount of time left. And so I asked our lab tech, who was named Judy, and I was like, Judy, what should I do? I have like 20 minutes. And she's like, oh my God, show this video. And so I broke the cardinal rule and I showed the video without having watched it first. So we were all seeing it fresh. So, Rise and Fall of the Great Lakes does depict a man in a red canoe who experiences the four pulses of Pleistocene glaciation while he is canoeing through some of the rivers of Canada. And it's hilarious because, like, one minute he's canoeing, and another minute he's like on the top of a glacier, and then the glacier melts and he falls, and like a mile, like he falls a mile.
what
Um,
plasticine
oh,
glaciation,
the Pleistocene glaciation, or
Pleistocene, Pleistocene.
oh, come on. Pleistocene is like a kid's like cartoon about like ice ages.
Okay.
It's real.
I, that was a mouthful, and I just needed to acknowledge that for everybody else
Fair.
listening.
That's a fair statement. Okay, so
Okay.
I show the video, right? And the video is funny, but the funniest part of the video is that it's actually, there's no dialogue at all. It is 100% sung. And it is sung in a variety of ways. Like sometimes there's square dancing music, sometimes there's yodeling, like, and probably about 2 or 3 minutes into the video, like it started with the song, and I'm like, well, that's funny. That's a funny little song. And then suddenly I'm like, I don't think they're gonna stop singing. And like, but I always ask a question about like what color the canoe was because I am so tickled by it. And to your point, like they're in class for it, or if they miss class, like that's recorded and they can access it on our
Oh,
learning
that's
management
funny
system.
because my bonus questions are content based. So like I think it's
Nope.
yeah, okay.
Mine are about the
'Cause I
feeling.
that takes me back to being in like 10th grade or in ninth grade when I was taking a 10th grade earth science class and there was a bonus question about the Beatles and I'm just like I've never listened to the Beatles. I can't appreciate this and now I don't get points.
So you didn't listen to the Beatles in earth science class then?
No, it was
Oh,
just like he had fun stuff that he liked on there and just reward. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's a whole other problem.
it's fine. It's geologists. We're quirky and we want everyone to appreciate our quirk.
What color is the canoe?
That is the question.
How do you do that for colorblind?
I actually will pause the video and be like, I'm absolutely going to ask you about what color the canoe is on your exam.
Oh, so they're pre-warned.
They
They're
are.
warned ahead of
They,
time, and you tell them. Okay, okay,
yes,
cool, cool,
yes.
good.
Um, and
So we have. Oh,
I
sorry.
was just
I
going
was
to
going
say
to just move
color
on.
blindness is actually a very real thing in geology because so I already know who's colorblind because the first couple weeks of
Okay.
class when they have to identify rocks and minerals, I find out then.
Oh, right, by color. That's a good
Yes,
point. That's an entirely good point.
it
You would
is.
know immediately.
I do.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, do we want to talk about graded homework?
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think who homework helps are like a couple groups of students. So
Well, I want to
yeah,
point out too that like the disconnect with that and why we're even talking about graded homework as a thing is because it is if right you are giving homework assignments as a place for students to practice for the
yes.
eventual exam,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like we're talking about the kinds of assignments that you're going to give where you want students to make mistakes and then you're taking points off for them making mistakes so you can give them feedback.
Yes, we're not asking for like a completeness grade, like I attempted this assignment. You're actually grading the assignment, um, again, to your point of being punitive about where students are making mistakes.
I will say there is homework out there that is more like is something that can be summative. Like you can do it as like a summative type of assessment, but we're talking about the type of homework that you're giving where it's going to be on the test later.
Yeah, yeah. So there are students who absolutely need extra practice, and that's the whole goal of homework, right? Is so that,
Hmm.
and some students, the same students probably who need deadlines, also can benefit from knowing that their homework is going to be graded as motivation, that extrinsic motivation to complete the homework, I think. I also, let's see, who else is helped by graded homework? I do think sometimes students might developmentally still need the stick. I think that might be it.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that a lot of them can benefit from the feedback portion of it, like if they're the kinds of students who don't just look at the grade and throw it away.
Yeah.
So I think that can help.
And I think students who feel like they're not good test takers, they can think of
Hmm.
homework as kind of a, a safety net again.
The place for them to demonstrate that they actually understand stuff,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because in reality, and this comes back to thinking about like what the purpose of your assessment is, like in reality everything's open book like
Yeah.
to some extent,
Yeah.
right? So sometimes students can demonstrate if they can demonstrate something that they were able to do like of their own volition under their own knowledge like in a homework environment setting, like that's sometimes just as good.
Yeah. Um, for sure. So, who I think graded homework harms are students who, number one, don't need the homework and don't have time, depending on like not every homework is the same, right? Finishing
Hmm.
up something that you started in class is very different than getting like a worksheet of 30 problems that are repetitive and that don't necessarily build and are just like practice for practice's sake and not for the
Hmm.
learning's sake, I think.
Yeah, especially like the students who don't need it, right? The ones who don't do it and can still show up and get hundreds on your exams.
Yeah,
Like, isn't that frustrating as a teacher when you're just like, this
sure.
student clearly can demonstrate the content, but then like you are giving them a B because they never did homework.
Absolutely. That is so true. Yes, I have had students who do that, who have done that regularly over
And
the years.
sometimes it's just that and sometimes it's just that it's the second time that they've taken the class, so like they already know the content. Maybe they don't need to show up. Like a student who just walks in just for the exam and can sit down and take it. Like how much homework do they actually need to do if they can demonstrate it there?
So let's unpack that for a second because so
Sure.
instructors find that super frustrating, but why do you think they find it frustrating?
I think they have a mindset or like a belief. They have a belief that the student is just not engaged. And I can definitely see that as an instructor. Like I put so much time into the stuff that I do in the classroom. And so like to have somebody just completely like, I don't need it. Like I can see that as being frustrating for some people.
I think some people struggle with that because they see this is a person who isn't following the rules that I have laid out for them, or this is like the way I think it should be done, and they're not doing it this way, and it pisses me off that they're still
Yeah.
successful and they're not listening to all of the wisdom that I'm bringing to this.
And I think that goes back to the idea of like grading anything for behaviors is just inviting bias, right?
Yes.
Like you're trying to mold the student into your own version of what you think they have to do to be successful when
Yes.
oftentimes there's many different ways to get where you want to go.
Yes. Yes. So yeah, I think it definitely harms the students um, who are penalized for not doing things right the first time. It also, I think, harms students who don't need to do the homework or are just like really busy and they're going to get to maybe they even do the homework before your exam, but it might just not happen that week.
Hmm.
I don't know. So going along with that, what about the students who don't hand in the homework and then get a zero in your grade book or get a zero on a test because they don't show up and they don't attempt it? What happens there?
Oh, I don't even know where you're going with that. I feel like you're fishing.
I am no. I wanted to move along to our
Oh, okay,
next.
cool, cool, cool. That was the segue.
It was my
And
segue.
when I said it feels like you're fishing, it's because I was already thinking about the next part. I'm just gonna leave, like we're gonna say that was intentional. It was a little intentional, but I also wasn't sure if that's where you were going.
Oh, it
But
was.
right, like where we have students who just don't turn stuff in, and what do you do with that, right? And one of the things that I like to put at the start of these types of conversations is a little voting question that I have for people to think about, which is, and I'm not going to read out all the math, right? But if you have 10 fish in a pond and you catch 8 of them, like what's the average weight of the fish in that pond?
So this is based on an excerpt from the Grading for Equity book by Joe Feldman. Right.
Right? And this is something that people will rack their brains with and then try and come up with an explanation for, when in reality, we do this all the time for our students.
So what's funny is that when we did that slide last week, the deafening silence. So you first of all put up like a
Hmm.
multiple choice question, right? Like where they had to try to figure out, and you did all the math for them and they were staring at this like these series of averages and they were like, I don't even know what's happening here. And I don't know what
Yeah.
it is, but I feel like I should be able to figure it out. But that's the point, is that you actually don't know what the average weight of the fish is because the other two fish could be 1 pound or they could be 500 pounds.
And so the analogy there is that when you have students that don't submit assignments, you don't know what that grade could have been if they did submit it. And by putting a zero in the grade book, oftentimes you are making it impossible for them to succeed. Like I just another thought experiment that I like to do just to like put this in terms of what happens in the grade book is that if you have 10 assignments And just for the sake of ease, a student gets 85 on 7 of them. So there's 3 missing assignments that get put in the zeros, and there's 85s on everything else. The average would come out as a 59.5, which is like nowhere near like the B plus that a student was demonstrating or the
Right.
B that a student was demonstrating.
Yeah, and so some people argue that you could take the median of that of the homework assignments,
Sure.
which would have been an 85, and other folks say, well, we don't know, so we're going to assume nothing, that they know nothing. But there's probably no way that could be mathematically possible that you could get 85. You could know a B plus of the assignment before and the assignment after, and they know absolutely nothing about the material
Right.
in between.
Hmm.
So I think this was one of the things that like in the book really threw me for a loop. For like the first thing that threw me for a loop was thinking about the 0 to 100 grading scale, which there's been a lot
Yeah.
written about. And since we read that book, I'm like I've been doing a deep dive into grading practices for my dissertation, and there's been plenty written about it, actually, the 0 to 100 scale, and how it's only really been in use for the past 100 years. And it used to be, so today, typically a C is about a 75, but historically, C was a 50, which in a perfect bell curve, right? Out of 0 to 100, 50 is the middle. So that's no longer the case because
But that's wild to think about.
it
And I can understand
is.
why that's probably no longer the case, right? Is because to think about a student in a physics class only walking away with 50% of the content stresses me out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. And then when you stop to think that, like, out of 100 points, that's like 59 of the 100%, that 59% of those grades are failing. And how that doesn't necessarily tell you at all what a student knows, because an F that is a 0 means they knew nothing. An F that is a 59 means a whole lot different, a whole lot. It
Well,
represents.
even an F that's a 50, right? Like
Yes.
represents it's like an F that's a 50 and an F that's a 0. Like
Yeah.
they're both Fs, but like
Yes.
they represent different amounts of understanding,
But
like very different amounts.
and like then you have the 10, like the 80 to 89 scale, which is like your B range, right? And that gets sliced into 3 different letter grades, but the 0 to 59 is all F. Like, it's wild. It like which just, it led me down this rabbit hole. So then I thought about the fact that we convert grades, and everyone who has had any experience in STEM knows that every time you convert from one scale to another, there's like a little bit of uncertainty that you're carrying over. And
Hmm.
so when we start, because there's rounding errors, right? So we start grading students typically on a 0 to 100 scale, and then that gets reported on their grade, on their on their I don't know what a report card isn't the
Transcript.
right word. Their
Transcript?
transcript,
Transcript.
yes, as like a letter grade, right? A through F. But then that gets converted into grade point, quality points, and ultimately your grade point average, which is on a 0 to 4
Hmm.
scale. And I was like, why are we converting grades 3 times? Like, we know
Hmm.
that conversion actually like just amplifies errors that and of rounding that occur. And so I'm like, wow, that's wild.
It is wild.
It really feels so unnecessary. You look like you're
Hmm.
going to say something.
No, I was just gonna say like it's just the idea that like putting in a 0 just makes it sometimes makes it impossible for the student to even come back. So like what's the
Yeah.
point of them to keep trying? So it can be really demotivating
Yeah.
for students. And so it's really only there is like the biggest stick that you could possibly shake at a
It is
student
the biggest
is like the
stick.
idea the idea that you could get 0 in the grade book.
It's true. It's true. And there is no evidence that putting in terrible grades motivates students. Like, there has not been one study that has found that putting in zeros makes students work real hard.
I think it's actually the other way around, right? Like
Absolutely.
is that okay,
Yes.
yeah, just checking.
No, yeah, 100%. But I mean, the wealth of of
Yes and
literature.
yes and
Yes, and yes, absolutely. So, so who do you think putting in a 0 helps?
Oh, like I said, I think it's just the people who are motivated by really big sticks.
Yeah. Uh,
Sorry, did you have something else? Hey, I just broke Amanda for those in the in the listening
Oh
audience.
my gosh. No, I think that's it. I think we've done it
Okay.
all. No.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think it's just fear, right? That's the whole thing. It's
Yeah.
just to scare the crap out of students so that they do something, even if it's bad, even if they feel like failures, even if they have to turn something in, they have to do something, because if they don't, then there's no way back.
And I will say too that like there's so many faculty out there who just kind of recognize this and try and just like throw spaghetti at the wall to try and fix it. Like dropping the lowest grade and
Yep.
stuff like that, right? Like that's something that happens all of the time. Or like maybe you'll drop
Yes.
even two assignments or
Yep.
something. Like if yeah.
Yes. Um,
It comes back to, right, to kind of where if this is where we want to end the discussion, right, is that you don't know what's going on in a student's life. So sometimes you might even exempt them from the assignment, so it's not counted in the grade. But
yes.
then you are relying on a student feeling comfortable enough to come disclose their trauma to you, and then which we know that students don't do, especially when there are like power dynamics in the classroom. Like I think there was an article we found when we were working on our on the grant that didn't get funded that like
38% or
uh
37%.
right female students were 37% less likely to ask for an extension on their work than like their male counterparts. And of course
Yes.
it's because men have the audacity. But
Endless amounts of audacity.
like there are definitely students in like marginalized and underrepresented communities that don't feel like what they are dealing with is a valid enough excuse in the eyes of their instructor. So even if it's something that like another student would ask for because they're comfortable asking for an extension or like an exemption,
Yeah.
like some students might not be, and you don't get to see that. And then you're also putting yourself in the position of having to be the person who is adjudicating whether or not something is appropriate level of trauma to like get an extension. Yeah.
That is like the thing, right? Is that like, I don't know, you'd have to create a whole different scale. Forget the GPA scale and the letter grade scale and the 0 to 100 scale. You'd need the trauma scale too. Like
Just
that
use the
trauma.
pain chart.
The pain.
Like which of the faces are you?
Oh no.
Let's not do that. That's awful.
And then if you're just like a meh, then that's like a 2 to 3 day extension. That's it. That's all it
Yeah, there
is.
you go. That actually maybe is not a bad idea.
Oh my God. No, we're not recommending. That's not.
We're not
That's
recommending
not
that.
the point. So, Jesus, Ben, because now you just told me everything I've been doing for 20 years is wrong. What are we going to do about this?
I think it's time to think about things differently. And if there are things that were on this list today that you feel like are valid to you, like that's okay. We want to talk about how we can make sure that that's transparent and worked into your classroom in a way that is equitable, because we're not afraid of saying that word.
Ooh, canceled. Yeah, so I think next week or next episode, what we'll do is we'll kind of unpack. All right, now that we've kind of taken out all of our
Dismantled.
dirty laundry and
Yeah.
dismantled all of the power structure that exists behind our traditional grading practices, how can we put this back together in a way that supports student learning and supports growth, and where our grades actually represent what students know rather than how well students behave according to our own personal behavior charts.
Yeah. We'll talk about what are some options, what we did, and how it went, and then how we fixed stuff when it didn't work well the first time
Which it
because we still
doesn't
believed in
sometimes.
it.
Yes.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But like the idea is that if you believe in something, don't give up on it on the first try. Like get some feedback, look at the data, see what you can do to adjust.
So, oh my God, this reminds me of this cheeseball podcast that I was listening to last week that said fail doesn't mean that something is worthless. Fail stands for first attempt in learning. Isn't that cheesy?
That is a what a wonderful way to end our episode.
It is. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you folks in our office hours soon. So please email us at coffeebreakclassroom@gmail.com. And
Mhm.
follow us. We're on Apple Podcast and Spotify and YouTube and TikTok. Our TikToks, oh my God, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Our TikToks are
Okay.
doing all right. It's
Nice.
nice.
Yeah, and office hours you can use for this kind of stuff too, right? If you have some grading practices that like you want to keep or that you want to think about or refine, like write in about the thing that you want us to talk about
Yeah,
for you. Yeah.
for sure. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening, morning, wherever you are where you're listening to this. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. It was robot time.